comments made by people regarding their experience of using it. The real goal for tonight is for us to then take a couple that have been completed on students and talk about, so how do you then get objectives from that? And then next week is to talk about, so how do I develop activities? So we're going to go ahead and get started. And I'm just going to move this so that I can see everything that I'm trying to see. And with that, let's just do a quick review, and I really encourage all of you, use the green check for a true, the red X for a false, and really think about this and answer for yourself. Don't assume that just because everybody else checked it that it's necessarily right, and it's a learning experience. It's not a testing experience. It's more of a learning one. So would you go ahead and see a common mistake we make when working with children who are nonverbal is that we interpret a reaction that they make, such as laughing, as communication. And Kristen, thanks for being courageous there. Oh, good. We've got more people answering. Good. Okay. The answer to that is actually true, and we talked about that, and that's one of the trickiest things for us to take a look at is whether or not people really, a child is really just simply reacting to something that's enjoyable to them, such as laughing, or not enjoyable as crying, versus that they're actually communicating, that they're purposefully communicating with you. And you can't tell that just by watching a child one time. You have to have repeated experience. And that's why it's so important that you get the people sitting around the table when you're filling out a communication matrix who know the child the best. So obviously family is there, and it may be a brother or sister or aunt. It may be a grandparent. And then it may also be the paraeducator who's with the child most of the time. It may also be some other person in the school who spends a great deal of time with the child. So the answer to that is actually true. We do make that mistake. Next one is for you to think about is, okay, the 4 basic reasons for communicating when the children are just beginning, based on the communication matrix, are refusing and rejecting, getting or obtaining what they want, engaging socially, and then providing and seeking information. Is that true or false? Again, the green arrow for true, the red X for false. Great. Okay, that is true, and we went through that the last time. It's wonderful. Here's another one. In order for an intentional behavior, remember we talked about behavior and then communication. And in order for an intentional behavior or an action by a child, such as crying, to become communication, the student must look at the person to indicate that he knows that person is listening. Is that a true or false? Okay. All right. So if a couple brave souls of you would be willing to say, why is that false? I mean, and just type it in the chat box. I'd be curious to see what you might answer to that. Right. Great, Kat. The child may be visually impaired, so they may have to find a different way to let you know that they know you are there. Some people are blind. Great. Thanks, Jean. Great. So we'll go on to the next one. And this is a multiple choice, and Michaela's going to be putting an A, B, C, D down where you see the green check and the red X shortly. There. So the communication matrix was designed to assess a student's communication through, though no language is yet developed, to look at the 4 basic reasons that young children communicate, so that once a level is determined, other more sophisticated behavior can be facilitated and modeled for the student to make progress in developing communication. And D is all of the above. And I see a bunch of Ds. And that's right. And I think for me, I pay a lot of attention to C. Also, I noticed somebody had a C up there. And D is all of the above, and that is exactly right. Good. That's great. Thanks. The communication measures what the child is communicating, meaning expressive communication. Is that true or false? And we have to wait for the green arrow and the red X to come back, and that'll be there shortly. There we go. So the communication matrix measures what the child is communicating, expressive communication. That's right, it does. It is the expressive communication. It will give me, the person who's communicating with the child, some receptive level to be working at, but the purpose of it is to actually identify the child's, the way they express their own communication. So I want to add a few things here. What important information do we need to collect about the student from others and through observation? This is additional information. We have to know their likes and dislikes, and you all got forms in your email, and there's a blank form that shows likes, and then there's a form right behind it that's blank, and it simply shows an unhappy face, and it's blank. And then there's a sample so that you see that. And the only reason I put this here is if you don't have the child's likes and dislikes, you're going to have a much harder time looking at how you're going to develop activities that are going to be motivating to the child. So you really want to collect this information. And if you don't have a lot of likes and dislikes written down, or you hear people say, well, she likes everything, I guess my response to you is, or she likes nothing, that you really need to start to look at how do I help that child start to be able to communicate and identify things that they truly like and don't like, and that we can read that they like it or that they don't like it. So the likes and dislikes, though I'm not going to talk about it more than that for you, I think it's very important that you look at the likes and dislikes. And I recently had somebody talk about the likes of the student, and they really thought they had a lot of likes, and the more they talked about it, the more they talked about the fact that, well, the child doesn't seem to mind it, which is different than a like. So keep that in mind. It's like I might not mind getting socks for Christmas or my birthday, but it probably is not my preference of what I get for Christmas. So their temperament, and you also got a handout about the temperament of the child, and it was just it's a kind of a short little cheat sheet, and it's really based on the idea of what are, is this child a fairly easygoing child, accommodates people easily, new people into their environment, doesn't seem to bother them, they adjust to changes constantly without a problem, those kinds of things. Or does the child is a little bit slow to warm, meaning in the beginning I may not be real excited about you, but after a fairly short time I get used to you and things are easier. And then also there's the difficult child, okay, and that's this form. And one of the questions becomes, I don't mean this child is being difficult or you are being difficult. What I mean is this child has a difficult time accommodating changes, things that he's not used to, things that he's not ready for, things that she can't anticipate because everything's changing for her. And then below identifying that about the child you're working with or the child you're doing the matrix on, take a look at some of the things that you might want to change or add as a result of that child's activity level or their approach, withdrawal, response, the adaptability to changes, the attention span, and persistence in an activity. And this may give you some ideas of strategies that you might want to be using depending upon that child's temperament. Okay? And then what works for the child and what doesn't work for the child. And you don't have a form for that, it's just a list. And I'll give you some examples. It may not work for this child that there is a new stranger in the house who goes to pick him up, play with him. That may not work, that having a new person come up and try to engage with them. It may not work that you don't give the child some anticipation cue of what's going to happen next. What might work is it might be I give the child plenty of time of my waiting for them to be able to respond to me or react to me instead of just going too quickly. So what works is that I give the child enough time to respond or react. So think about those when you're talking with the team, the family, what really works for this child and what doesn't. For other children, it may be that they need to have lots of deep pressure things. That works for them. But if I lightly put my hand on their shoulder and just sort of rub it lightly, that may just set them off. And so that doesn't work. So light touch and light pressure may not work for the child. And then what sensory channels? The vision, the hearing, smell, taste, touch, movement are their strongest. And then how do we make adaptations when necessary? And that's the form that we sent you last week, but we didn't use. And this is an example, very shortened example, just so we could get it on the slide. And what you do with this is you may videotape the child, and then you and several other members of the team sit around and jot what you see the child do. So on the first line, you jot that whatever it is you saw. And I'm going to go to the next one since it's an example, but it's the same thing. And that is the child raises his head up as a shiny blue pom-pom is shaken. So what do I think? What sensory channel do I think that might be, the child may be responding to? Is it visual? Is it tactile? Is it auditory? And the OG is olfactory gustatory, that's smell and taste. Or is it proprioceptive vestibular, which is movement? And you'll see that each line, the person simply wrote down what they saw. So if I'm busy writing something down here and I miss something that the child does, it's okay, just keep going. And it may be that somebody else on the team is going to catch something else. And then the idea is to look at it and say, okay, so he turned his head as the shiny blue pom-pom is moved. It looked like he was following it. So that may be visual, but it may also be auditory because there's a sound when you shake a metallic pom-pom. So you're actually filling in things that you see the child does, and then you start taking a look at what is going on. So I'm going to go to the remainder of that page. It's just on 2 slides. And so the idea is to add up, and where you see P/V times 2 means it happened twice, okay? Or you'll see 4, Roman numeral 4, under take spoon and puts food in mouth, just so you don't have to keep using all the lines. You can do it that way also. So the question becomes, what would you say, based on the numbers in that one observation, what do you think is probably this child's strongest sensory channel right now? And you can go ahead and write in the chat box. Most of you are saying the movement one, the proprioceptive vestibular, and that's got 18. And the next closest is 10. And the example that I'll give you is the team was saying that this student wasn't doing much at all, very, very passive in school. And as soon as they took a look at that and took a look at a video that was done at home within activities that this child did, they all went, oh my gosh, we're doing all visual auditory things, and we need to be adding some adaptations to it. So for example, in circle time, it happened to be in preschool. In circle time, what happened is they added movement to each of the songs that they would sing so that that child could participate in a way that was motivating to him. And that's the thing about likes and dislikes. If I can get in the sensory channel that is the strongest, it doesn't mean that for example, the visual is going to be poor the rest of his life. It just means right now I need to add a component and pair a component that will allow the child to participate participate in a way that's motivating and understandable to him and actually feeds his system. So that's the purpose of doing sensory use channel form. One of the things that I recommend is that people do it like on 3 different kinds of activities, but not one that is not one that is directed by another person. You want it when they have more free time or choice time, and they're not in a very structured activity that you've planned, because you tend to get more information in that at that time. So those are some tasks, and those are pieces of information that you really need to take a look at. Okay. And then, are there health considerations? Does this child miss a lot of school? Did this child have significant surgery, and that you're seeing big changes in that child after the surgery because they're feeling better? Those are the questions you want to think about too, because all of those help give you information that once you have the communication matrix, it rounds out how you're going to develop objectives, and it rounds out how you're going to go ahead and develop activities. So what and how do they communicate? So the question is, what do they communicate? And we talked about the 4 basic reasons initially, not forever, but initially, and that's protesting or refusing what they don't like or don't want. It's getting what they do want or getting more of what they want. It's the social interaction piece, and then it's the seeking and providing information, which is, as I'll remind you from last week, that's that section that we're expecting kids to come to school at that level, and for these students, they're not ready for that yet. But oftentimes we're busy teaching at that level. And I'll use my lack of knowledge in the area of chemistry, and that is if somebody gave me a chemistry book and just said, I'm going to present this chemistry to you, and you just keep reading it and keep reading and keep reading it until you get it. And that's, in a way, sometimes what we're doing at school is we're so busy working at the language level for the child, and they don't even have some of the precursors for it, and we're busy trying to make them use the language level, and so there are these huge gaps that happen, and we can't figure it out. And part of it, and that's the part that we really want to look at today with a couple examples. So I think you got one of these. I don't know that we sent this to you, but I think it's in one of the slides from last time. If it's not, then you've got it for this time. But this is just a reminder. Take a look at it real quickly. Here are some of the ways that we look at communication system. Is the child using body language and facial expression? Are they vocalizing in a way to communicate? Are they using gestures? Are they using touch cues? Are they using object cues? Are they using 2- and 3-dimensional tangible symbols? And we talked about the 2- and 3-dimensional, so I'll give a couple examples if you'll look at the screen for those of you. So this is a tangible symbol. It is not a tactile symbol, but it's tangible, meaning it can stay there. The child can refer back to it. They don't have to hear the word ketchup or see the sign ketchup and then remember it once it's gone. So that's why we call it tangible. It's there permanently until you remove the picture. So this is one example. One of the things I've done with students who can look at 2-dimensional, which is the one you just saw, this is also 2-dimensional. And this was drawn right with the child when she was in the little wheel. I'm not even sure what that was. That's why I drew it that way, I guess. But she knew right away because I was drawing her in it, so that this made sense to her. Instead of me doing a whole bunch of symbols, I cut them out, I print them, I cut them out, I glue them, I put them on something, and the child has no idea where it came from. And for this child, it had to be more concrete for her than a simple black and white line drawing such as board maker. This is another tangible, but again, 2-dimensional, and this is a Polaroid photo. For those of you who are very young, you probably don't even know what those are. For those of us who are older, we do. We started with this little girl here. We wanted to get to black and white if we could, so we ended up putting a black and white on the back so that eventually we could go to black and white. We were in the midst of trying to find out with her, would she ever be able to use something other than photographs? And you may want to know why we started with photographs, and the reason we did is she enjoyed looking at the photographs of the family in their photo albums. Okay? This is just another quick example. So we took a picture of the scissors she used, and then we converted to a black and white. It doesn't look exactly like the scissors. And that's how you're moving from one item to another. And we talked about object cues. So this might be an object cue. It's a spoon, meaning to the child, we're going to go eat. It's time to eat. When I turn that into a symbol, a three-dimensional symbol, I put it on a card, and this no longer is the spoon that the child's going to eat with. It represents it. Also, for those of us who know that for the golden arches, the child who, and as soon as you get near a McDonald's, they're all clapping and yelling. So the whole idea of using logos is another way to do it, and that's two-dimensional. And then this is an abstract three-dimensional. This is like a little piece of rope. It's tied with a knot, and it represents mad. And this is an abstract tactile symbol. The only thing I could come with is I'm at the end of my rope is what I looked at that and thought, I wonder if that's what they meant by that. So I just want us to review that quickly, that those are all some of the communication systems. And we're going to watch a video now. And I want you to watch this student. And for those of you who were here last week, I think most of you were, if not all of you, there is a picture. Let's see. Let me wait until we get it. There we go. I'd like you to watch Christopher, and you all saw him last week. I'd like you to look at how many ways you think he is communicating, and think about all the ways we just talked about.
Come on, we're going to go get your snack. Christopher, which one? Which one? Put your hands back down. Which one? The blue one? You want blue applesauce today?
Okay, so if you would type into the box, what way did you see him, Christopher, communicating, not the adult? Okay, so I'm seeing eye gaze, certainly touch. Those are ways he responded to her when she was asking questions. The physical movement piece was there also, but he touched the item after she did some moving of those two cups. And just a reminder that moving is what caught his vision because of his cortical vision impairment too. He reached for the one he wanted. That was another way he indicated he looked at her, he knew where she was. Does Christopher know if she is looking directly at him? No. She's too far away. Her face is, not her hands, but her face. So that's just a reminder to you about his vision. So those are all things move towards the adult, just possibly vocalizing. And that was one of the interesting things is his vocalizations were tough for most of us, even close to him, other than Mom, to really be able to read much out of that. But those are all great. So those are that's the communication system you saw him using right now. Okay, it doesn't necessarily mean that's the only part. So you're going to start filling in. So where you see that communication circle or wheel, what are the things that you would write in for Christopher okay? That's what you want to be thinking about as we go through. I'm hoping to get to all 3 students tonight, if at all possible. If not, we'll save the 3rd one for next week, in addition to going back and doing the first 2 on the next the next focus area. So that's one of the things I want you to continue to keep in mind as we go through this, is how is the child communicating? Now, I am going to throw this in, and that is, I'm going to ask you, how did you see the adult communicating? And if you would like me to play that one more time, would you put a green check in the box so I know if most of you want me to go back and play it one more time? Yeah, I think we will. So I'll go ahead and I'll tell you when to play, and we'll watch that. So this is Kelly. This is his paraeducator. And push play now.
Come on, we're going to go get your snack. Christopher, which one? Which one? Put your hands back down. Which one? The blue one? You want blue applesauce today?
Okay. Someone's already answering. They saw tactile sign, so that was the which one that she was doing under his hand. Verbal, talking, shaking the object, moving the object, asked in sign language which one he wanted, hand under hand signing, tactile signing, showing the objects close to him. And so, good. An object cue. She was using those objects as the cue for him. They weren't a symbol representation yet because they weren't on a card. It wasn't the lid of that or the color. It was actually what he was going to eat. Spoken language, tactile, object cue. Great. So those are things that if we had 2 circles here, one that said the way Christopher communicates, and then one that said the way we communicate and he understands us best, some of that would show up in the other circle. But we're going to stay focused on expressive, but I have to keep telling you there's a receptive here, and if you're using the communication matrix in a way that's useful, you'll get both pieces of information. Where should I be putting my energy at this point, and how should I be communicating with him, not just how is he communicating back with me. All right. Now, remember the behaviors that we talked about last week. There were changes in posture, limb movements, head movements, body movement, facial expressions, eye gaze, hand and finger movements, feet and toe movements, vocalizations, use of photos, line drawings, pictures, taking the person to what the child wants, so I lead them over. That's another way, another behavior. An approximated sign. It's not the exact perfect sign, but it's very close. It might be a home sign, one that they learned at home and the family uses. Written or brailled words, pantomiming the action or the object, mimicking the sound of the item or the action. And I think about little kids, very young, who will be sitting there with their little car on the floor and they'll be going boom, 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 that kind of thing, that kind of imitation. The use of objects, and we just talked about that, the use of the spoon that the child's going to use. So that's just a reminder again about last week. Oh boy. I think one of the things that I want you to think about is, so now you've done it, and I know a few of you actually went back and did one on a student. And we had a couple people who emailed me and volunteered for their child or their student to be part of it. And so we're going to go through 3 different examples. I'm hoping to get to that, all 3 tonight. This is a reminder to you. Remember, we talked about the pre-intentional, which is and the intentional behavior, not yet communication. That's the light gray part. Those first 2 rows, and the change in colors is the difference between refusal and protest and obtaining and getting what you want, the social interaction, and then information gathering or giving of information. And then the dark gray two are the unconventional and conventional communication. We started to talk about that unconventional being the fact that the child may just take something and toss it, meaning I don't want it, which is unconventional, kind of socially not acceptable, but it is a beginning communication because I'm letting you know. I might have thrown it at you, I might have looked at you and then tossed it, I might have touched it and thrown it into your hand. If your arm's close enough, I might have given it to you, which would start to move into that conventional part. And then the concrete symbols and the abstract symbols, and I showed you concrete symbols up here, and then abstract symbols are those things such as signing, talking, vocalization, and then language. So just a quick reminder about that as we go through this. This is definitely a you participate night, because for me just to talk about it for this is useless. So this is the actual grid. So all of you had one of these in black, white, and gray, I think it was, on the whole, the draft part that you got last week. So I just want to remind people, here we are, and we're going, and the top to bottom, okay, the child starts at the top and has that unintentional or pre-intentional behavior in refusing, and then in getting what he wants, and then social interaction and information. So it's the exact same thing. I just changed the color and gave you the exact replica. So don't let that confuse you from the other one, okay? All right, so student A. Now, student A you've already seen, and that's Christopher. The only thing that I want to talk about with this before you watch it is I want you to be thinking about, here's the child we're going to talk about. I'm going to then show you his communication grid, his matrix, and then we're going to talk about this is what it was, and then we're going to talk about how do you look at objectives. So this is just another view of Christopher. This is Christopher older than in the last one you saw. His paraeducator is working with him. She happens to be talking to me because I'm videotaping. So when you hear her talking to me, pay attention to what she's doing with him and how he's responding. Pay attention to all of him, his whole body. Remember facial expressions, verbalizations, or vocalizations, anything as far as his communication piece goes too. All right? So let's go ahead and push play now.
Come over here so you can see his face. Swing time, yeah! Thank you. Look what I'm gonna hang up. Look. Yeah.
That's Sherry, that is just perfect that you put the swing so he can really see it, because that encourages him to move forward, even though he may be going in the wrong direction now. It's like, I know, I'm excited.
So that's Christopher. And just for you, so you know, on that card there was a small bit of netting stapled onto that card, and that represented being able to play in the swing. And I'll give you one more piece of information about this. Sometimes, even though the paraeducator's voice was excited, if he did not know what the card was after he felt it and saw it, he did not smile. He didn't even begin to smile. And what we saw is we saw him smiling, even touching the card. And my first thought was to say to her, gosh, I don't know. He does have some hearing. He's hearing how excited you are. I wonder if that's what he's smiling at. But then I watched him with other things and went, nope, I don't think that's it. I think he recognized that symbol. And that's the thing about likes and dislikes. I'm going to keep pushing at you. And that is, you need to know likes and dislikes. You don't start out with tactile or tangible symbols with a child on things that he doesn't like the bathroom. Okay? I don't know very many kids who just love to go to the bathroom and get changed or go to the bathroom. So this is a sample of Christopher's communication matrix, where you see all of the lines angled. That is exactly what the team and the family agreed he could do. So if we think about the first two rows, not columns, but rows, being pre-intentional and intentional behavior. And then we look at the third row, and that's the unconventional communication piece. Okay? And it's around, he's starting to do some things with making choices and with getting more of something that he wants. And then we drop down to the second from the last row, and we see that he is indicating that he wants more of something, and that happens to relate to food. This is a guy who kind of lives to eat. He loves to eat. And so for him, food. So he learned the sign more, and it happened to be approximated. And for those of you who saw last week, remember he was playing with the vibrating ball, and when Anne took the vibrating ball away from him, and she put two in each corner, and then he was banging his hand on the table. That was his approximation for more. And so that was the one thing. And this is what we see sometimes is we're busy down here at the last two rows working when we need to be looking at what are some ways we can help him communicate and not try to skip 8 rows or 4 rows or 3 rows. So all of you, we're supposed to have with you your communication matrix. And what I'd like you to do is go to the grid that you have available to you so that you can read specifically what it says. Now, if you can read everything on here, that's fine. But if for some of us, that'd be kind of small for us to read. So this is what I'd like you to be thinking about for a minute or two. I want you to think about the fact of where would you be going? Number one, we know he's at a communication level. So one of the things that I think about is what does he need in order for him to stay at a communication level with me. And remember last week we watched him look at the person. We saw him do the same thing when he was walking to get to the place where he was going to pick his snack out. We saw him looking toward the person. So he knows that somebody's there. He may not read their facial expressions. He might pick up on the intonation patterns, you know, that somebody's excited, somebody's happy. He might pick that piece up. He might not. So the question becomes, first, where are you going to establish some objectives? And I want you to think about this for a minute in terms of, remember we're talking about him being able to refuse something, being able to get what he wants, socially interacting with people, and then giving information. So think in terms of that. If you were going to be working with Christopher, if he was your student, what things might you think about doing? And make sure you look at the grid. Not how are you going to do it, but what might you be working on? Would you be working on making choices? Would you be working on requesting attention or greeting people? Where would you be working? And I want to clarify with you that I do not look at being able to check every single box off. That is not my goal. Okay, my goal is to say, where is the next place I want to go with Christopher now that I have this information? There are some gaps here, and the question is how do I work on those gaps? So first let me ask you, what are the gaps? Where do you see gaps for him of what he needs or what he doesn't have? I don't care which way you word it, but where are they? What do you think he needs? If you had to just pick 3 things, what would you pick? Refusing an object or action and requesting more action. Requesting a new object. His ability to request. Requesting a new action and a new object. Requesting more. Requesting actions to get something. He has preferences, so I would really like to give him some behavior to request and reject. Making choices, requesting attention, requesting something new. Under the conventional communication, right, trying to move into his being at that fourth row of more conventional communication. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to sign to him. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to talk to him. It just means I want to get him moving so he understands what are some things I can do. So I saw quite a bit of refusing at a more conventional level, requesting, trying to get something new. So if I'm going to try to help him request a new action or a new object, let's say that he had some free time and he was playing with some vibrating toys that he likes, and let's say that inside Christopher would like to request to go in the swing, since you saw him in the swing and it was something he likes. What does Christopher have to have available to him? What does Christopher have to have in order to be able to let you know, I want to swing, I'm done playing with these vibrating toys? Yeah, he has to have object cues, sign for the swing. He has to have some tangible symbol like the netted swing on the card. Yeah, exactly. What are the things that represent? So that means that while he's still up here, I need to be exposing him to tangible, tactile symbols and use object cues in some cases so that he starts to have a vocabulary that he can use with me. So that's one thing I have to have. And then, of course, I have to make sure that those tangible symbols are available to him, that they're not put away somewhere that he can't reach whenever he wants to. I mean, those all get added on, but I'm just trying to talk about the objectives right now and what do I have to have. So that's the indication. If I'm trying to get him somewhere between unconventional and conventional things in the area of refusing, getting what I want, and also my social interaction, then I have to be doing something at a receptive level. And where things got hung up were that too many tangible symbols were presented to him at one time. And because that happened, and people did not see him making the connection, and therefore this doesn't work, he got stuck on this communication matrix for a while because there's no way for me to help Christopher. It's not like he's going to learn to be able to say, I want to play on the swing. So he can't do that. So that's one. He doesn't sign enough. In fact, in this day, and he's now like 19 years old, and he still only has one sign, and that is more. So those are things that you keep in mind of how many other ways can I present it to him, and what do I need to be doing so that he can move along on this communication matrix. And I'll just quickly say to you one important thing, and that is when you get down to concrete symbols, that may be where a child is going to be the rest of his life. Because sign language, for whatever reason, is not available to him. He doesn't get it, he doesn't understand it, he doesn't use it, he maybe can't use his hands well enough to form it, he doesn't see it well enough. I mean, there are all kinds of reasons. It doesn't mean I'm going to limit him, but getting him to move into the area of language may not be where he's going to get to. And for other children, this is just a step along the way to a whole different way of assessing his communication because he's moving along it, he gets to the language level, and then you don't use this form. But this is to help me know where I can be helping him so that he might take my hand, and if I put my hand in the pointer finger and he takes my hand and points to something, then that's a more conventional communication. And if he can't move without going through his walker, he may not ever get to the point of pointing because he doesn't see far enough away. But for other children that some of you are working with who don't have a vision problem, that may very well be what they can do. So once again, I can't just talk about how how you just assess his, because it always leads to what should I be doing too. All right, so we came up with some objectives. One objective people came up with was additional tangible symbols to represent things he likes, at least in the beginning. Okay. Another one was to be able to refuse and to obtain things that at a more conventional level. Okay. And it may be that for him, it's about getting into the concrete symbol row. But what I didn't see was, I'd like you to take a look over and step over to away from the refusing and getting what you want to the social piece. Now, I work, some of the children we work with are kind of thing kids, meaning you're a great tool to get me what I want, but once I get it, get out of my way and leave me alone, okay? And then there are other children that I don't care about those things, I just want you to be near me. And I want to know that you're right next to me and that you're patting me or you're rubbing my back or you're interacting with me in some way. And those are kind of like people kids. And there's nothing wrong with either of them. However, it is important, especially for kids who are nonverbal and are more isolated in the first place. They need to have ways to reach out to people and for things to be predictable for them. So I'd like you to just take a look at the row that's about unconventional and then the conventional behavior row. But look in the social engagement area, and I want you to see, do you see anything in there that you would want to work on? And I think one person or more than one of you said, how about requesting attention? Like purposefully trying to get my attention. Okay, so that might be a child hitting a switch. Who knows? It may be a child who, because this child has a one-on-one paraeducator for most of the day, that one-on-one is near him and he can reach and touch them because that's the way he'll communicate, that I'm trying to get your attention. There are other ways to get attention. For some kids who can vocalize, they might be able to use a vocalization that gets your attention, that's purposeful and communicative. But are there some other things that you would think about if you're trying to help this child be more social and being engaged? You know, how many times do we say we're trying to work with kids? Okay? So, yeah, Kristen, you said a way to gain the adult's attention, some way to tell us something. What about, you know, one of the things I look at greetings. Because children like to come over and greet many of the students that we work with. They like them. There might be one or two in the class who really enjoy this child, and yet there's no way to greet. And the child just comes in, you start the day, you walk over, and especially if the child has vision, you don't even say, you know, hi. You know, it might be, hi, John, but then after that, it might be, you know, I hope your day was good and blah, 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 but I don't expect anything back from him. So it might be, in Christopher's case, it was I put my hand up within about 8 inches of his face. He brings his hand up, we match like a high five, and that's our high. Because he loves movement. He likes touch stuff. For another child, that would not work. And you may not need to do that. And then for bye, because if you're going to greet people, then you have to let them know when you're leaving. And so if I bring my hand up and we do a movement that goes back and forth, our hands match together, it gives a movement of my saying, Christopher, bye-bye. And that might mean that I'm leaving to take my lunch break. It's not just bye-bye at the end of the day. And when I come back, I re-greet him if I'm working directly with him. So it might be greeting. I think him reaching out and touching for attention might work. We could also work on reinforcing his vocalizations. So those are some other things that we might want to look at. There is no, so I'm really clear with you. You need to think about the child and what is motivating to the child. Now, if getting things are more motivating to Christopher, the greetings may be, hi, I do my high five with you, and then I get something from you. Maybe you hand me something in exchange when I'm greeting you because I get my favorite vibrating toy that I get to play with for the first 2 minutes before the teacher's ready to get the day going. So I need to think about what can I pair to make it motivating for him, because greeting people may not be what motivates him. He may not really care that much about just meeting people and having them greet him. It takes time, and it takes a lot of constant, consistent patience. And I know we all hear people say, oh, you must be so patient. Well, I'm not particularly patient, but I have to be consistent and I have to be willing to wait. So those are how you start to look at what are the objectives. But again, it's the child's likes and dislikes. It's about their temperament. It's about, do they have health considerations? It's about the best sensory channel to go through with him. All those things we've talked about already. Those all come to play in when you start picking out those. And it also means that if I'm the physical therapist or the occupational therapist, I am also using it. So if it's agreed that this is what we're going to do for greeting, when that physical therapist comes in, when that occupational therapist comes in, when that other paraeducator comes in, whoever it is, they come up and greet him also. And it's just like asking me as a classroom teacher, I want you to reinforce these 3 things, the child rolling over, the child crawling. You know, you as the therapist are asking me to reinforce some things, and you need to be reinforcing them. Because if you're not, then what you're doing with them is like out in la-la land, and it doesn't make sense for the child. And that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to make sense of this, because that's how the communication happens. Those paraeducators and teachers who constantly exposed Christopher to that representation of a swing to the point that he could smile when he saw it, that was huge. But they were consistent and did it every day. And if somebody came in and subbed, they did it. And they used the same words as they were talking to him. Christopher, let's swing. So whether it was me, somebody else, the paraeducator, whoever, it's going to be, Christopher, let's swing. At the same time that I'm bringing that representation of swinging to him. So does that, are there conventional tactile signing signs? Oh, so in sign language, sign language is sign language. If you do it tactily, what tactile interpreters and tactile signers will tell you is, I may use the same signs, but I'm using them differently. It's almost like there's a little platform here, and I'm setting the scene for the child if I'm doing it tactily. But it's using the same signs. Okay, there's a spatial aspect to it that is more involved, and I can't go into that right now, but it's not like tactile signing is one way and signs and ASL or signs are another way. That's not accurate, okay? People will also say to me, so are there tactile symbols that we should always be using? And I will tell you that there are a couple systems out there, and this is a bias of mine, so I want to be real clear with you. When I'm telling you certain strategies, I'm not saying this is a bias of mine, but this is a bias of mine. And you may find something different, but I do find that the ones that are consistently done exactly the same way are not necessarily as easily learned by the child, because whatever the symbol is that somebody picked, the tangible symbol, it doesn't mean anything to the child. If I put a miniature school bus on a car, on a little card, okay, and I put the miniature school bus on there, then it's time to go home. Okay, I'm just going to make this up. It's time to go home. The problem is that child doesn't have a whole feeling of what the whole school bus is. So what I might put on that card is some kind of a strap, like a safety harness the child uses. That material, a strap, would go on that card, because that's what the child feels. That's what the child sees. So using miniatures are not the way I'm going to go. But what might work for one child may not work for another child. I'll use the feeding thing, for example. So I'm tube fed, and somebody brings me the spoon because that represents eating, but I never use a spoon. So what would that have to do with my eating? Where a tube or and I know there's a right word for it, and somebody's probably going to type it for me. So it's the tube that is used for it, the syringe. Thank you, Marty. So that syringe might be used as the representation for her eating because her child doesn't use a spoon. So that's why I have a hard time with somebody being very consistent about, well, all of them are going to be the same. I know that there are people that say if the kids are all in the same classroom, you should use them consistently. If there are several kids in the classroom, I might feel differently about that one. I might have to really give that one some consideration. But a lot of our students, there aren't 3, 4, and 5 children in one classroom that are going to be using tactile symbols. Just taking a look here. Oh, that's interesting. An oily rag in a glass jar represented getting into the bus for a smell calendar. So here's one about using, smells. And there are kids that are tube fed who actually enjoy smells, and therefore smells can be used for different things too. And yes, Jean, thanks she says, have you ever used smell cues in place of object cues? It worked well for a child who couldn't use his hands and was also totally blind. It was receptive on the child's part. That means the child can't produce that, okay? But he could recognize and be able to anticipate what was going to be happening next. Smell is tricky in that you have to, number one, find out if the child has a sense of smell, because some kids don't. Some are turned off by it. And then if I use a certain smell, and that smell is reproduced in the larger community or at home in a different way, it may be that starts to confuse the child about what in the heck, gosh, that vanilla smell at school meant somebody was going to massage my hands and arms. And now I smell vanilla at home, and I think somebody's going to massage my hands and arms, and I love that, and then I'm going to get upset. So you have to really be careful about smell and how do you make it natural. So that was a great point, Jean, and a good comment. We use the tactile to go with what he uses in the classroom, such as calendar time, playtime, lunch, work, walk, and bus. There's more. But what you want to do is pick the things you know he likes first and use those tactile symbols. So we could just go on tactile symbols for a long time, and probably that's going to be at the Summer Institute for sure. But I want to go ahead and have us move on. I don't want to miss getting the other 2 kids. So would you put a green check if you feel like you're starting to get a sense about establishing objectives based on what the scoring is? Just so I'm getting some feedback about whether it's working in general or is it still way out there. Okay, so there's some of you. Great. Okay, thank you. We'll keep going. So this is an example of Christopher. So his expressive communication ways are he does do some vocalizations because you can tell when he's really not happy and he's in pain. And so that was a vocalization that was important for us. Unfortunately, he had to have range of motion exercises after a surgery, and we came up and paired something that he really likes with it, which kind of got his mind off of the pain. Facial expressions, definitely. He uses tactile symbols. He uses his body language. He'll do movement towards something, moving in towards it. He'll tense, he'll pull back, he'll turn away. So that body language, body movement, those are all his expressive ways of communicating. So we talked about the objectives, and Michaela, did you get the ones down that I already said, or do I need to repeat them? Okay, so we talked about the issue of possibly greetings. okay, then he would have to respond instead of starting to initiate. Okay, but I saw initiate several places y'all talked about it, and it's initiating. So we've got to get further on that communication matrix for him to be able to initiate by picking up a tactile symbol and handing it to me, pulling it off of a board or out of a fanny pack or wherever. We talked about the issue of refusing and getting what he wants on a more conventional communication or concrete symbol level. So that would be another area we want to work on. I think somebody else had making choices. So those would be some objectives we would have for him. Now, student B. Student B is, let's see, we're going to do her video. This is Maya. Maya is 6 years old. Okay, remember Christopher was in middle school during that time where you saw the video, later elementary and middle school. So he was at that time 11-ish, somewhere right in there. Maya is 6. Actually, Maya's mother and grandmother and SLP and teacher are all on this video conference. This is just a little introduction. Maya has something called charge syndrome, and the CHARGE used to represent something, but we are finding more and more that there's some misnomers in there, so I would refer you to www.chargesyndrome.org if you want to learn more about it and get more in-depth information. I don't want to put a lot of time into it, and I don't want to just give you the representation of those letters because it's really, it's old. That's no longer the information. So just so you have a sense of who she is, we're going to have you meet Maya. And Maya has a profound hearing loss, and Maya has charge. And charge typically comes with a vision impairment, but many other complications. And the vestibular proprioceptive system is often impacted greatly for these children. So Maya's just one person, and now that you've seen one person with charge doesn't mean you understand what charge is. It just means you have a sense of who she is. So let's meet Maya and push play now. So that's Maya, and that's just a little piece of who she is. This actually got answered, and I just reproduced it on here. It's going to be a little hard to see, so you're going to want to go back and refer to your copy. This is actually page 3 when it talked about how does Maya refuse or protest. And the answer is yes, she can refuse and protest. And she does it through a variety of ways. So what I want you to do is take a look. Oh, okay. Thank you. We will. I'll make sure that we wait a little bit longer for those of you whose computer may be a little bit slower playing the videos. So this is Maya. She's down to the level. If you look at the level on the right-hand side, you're going to see the pre-intentional, the intentional. Those are both behavior, and she definitely has those. And the next one is unconventional. And the comment made by the people who were filling this out said Maya is really between level 2 and 3. It's kind of hard to tell the difference between an action on her part and the unconventional type of communication. It's a little tough to see that sometimes. And we talked about that last week, that children are in the middle, in between things all the time. It is not that this is just some nice and neat black and white clean thing, because it isn't. And so She's only, and here's the comment, she has only just started this within the last 6 months. Well, within the last 6 months, Maya had an operation that assisted in helping her deal with some previous heart problems. And so she is more active, she's healthier, she feels better, and everybody's seeing a different Maya, somebody who's way more interested than she was before because she was dealing with not feeling particularly well. So that's why you have to ask that question about health considerations. What are the health considerations? Is there something going on for this child? Does this child have a heart defect that is so significant that she or he fatigues so quickly that they can barely get moving on something before they tire out on you and before they fatigue out and need a rest? So that's giving us some information about the refusal. And I just wanted to put these pages up for you so you can see the information, and you can see people writing notes about it, and all I did was go ahead and put the date that the note was written, because if I go back and use this same form in a year and there are changes, I want to make sure that I know that this was from 2010 versus 2011 and 2012 if I'm still using this form. So once again, you're looking at the right side and you're seeing that she is more interested in action than things. And therefore, she'll let you know when she wants more of something, an action. Okay? So bouncing up and down, whatever the action may be. So those are things. And it says, Maya rarely initiates any form of play. Activities she will engage in, we initiate. Okay? So again, we're talking about that initiation. It's like when we're working with kids who have a vision loss, and maybe not even vision loss, for kids that we are constantly asking them questions, then they think there's always somebody there to ask the question. And the example I'll give you on a deaf-blind child that I've worked with is this young man was never sick, but one day he said, Mrs. Baker, is Mrs. Baker sick and want to go home? And she said, well, no, I don't want to go home. But are you sick? And finally he could go, oh, yes. So he had to ask a question to get her to ask the question. And that's that initiation piece. We ask way too many questions or we give way too much direction. We need to give kids some time so they can show us they can initiate. And she's always seeking some sensory kinds of actions, such as swinging, rocking, lights, the computer TV, going outside, or even retreating to a room. So those are things that are great to put in here because it gives indications to people about where she is and what she needs to be working on. Okay? So we once again got down to the unconventional communication area. So she's solidly in that for both getting what she wants, even though it tends to be more sensory-seeking actions, okay, and refusing what she doesn't want. And you can once again read your form. And then the third section was the social engagement. And one was, does she request attention? Does she demonstrate that she's interested in somebody who comes into the house or into the room? Does she demonstrate any interest? How does she get your attention, even if she's not trying to? And then how does she purposely get your attention? And then we talked about showing affection. And then we talked about the issue of, does she know how to greet? Does she even have a sense? And many times what happens is we go somewhere and we just start in instead of doing a greeting and a reintroduction of who I am. I don't care if the child can see you and hear you. It is still important to go in and make a connection with that child. You don't just walk into, well, I do. So the people in my project always tease me because I'll get on the phone and I'll say, hey, Michaela, blah, 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 instead of saying, hi, how was your Thanksgiving? Okay? And so I joke about the fact of being a little socially behind. But that's the reality of it. It's important to make the connection so that they understand, the kids understand that social connection is an important piece, and that the kids are more interested in someone else outside of themselves, because being nonverbal, you really pull in oftentimes to who you are inside, and you self-isolate because it's so hard to communicate. So if we look over on again, if we look at the levels, the first one being pre-intentional, intentional, unconventional, so she's showing some stuff in unconventional on these first two that are yeses, okay, number, I think it's 3 and 4. Okay, and then she's even got some stuff down in the conventional level, starting to. And that's one of the places, again, we want to be thinking about, okay, so what does that tell me? Where do I want to be working with her? What does she need to be more independent and more communicative and more initiating? And then this is the fourth area, and that's ways to provide or seek information. And I reminded you that that's that whole group that we have of kids, that we expect kids to come to school with all that other stuff that we're talking about so that they can ask for, seek, and provide information when asked questions by people. And you can see that this is all no. There's a little comment here, and it says, I'm trying to remember what that was. Let me find my form because I thought that was very interesting. They put down no, but she will occasionally label objects, but she's signing kind of to herself. It's not necessarily if I show her something and say, what's the sign for this, that she's going to do it when I want her to. But when she's on her own, looking through a book, she might see a picture, or she might feel an object or see an object, and she might make a sign for it. So she's beginning to do some labeling there too. Okay? So that's the 4 areas, basic areas we talked about. This is what it looks like. Now, the dotted line means it's emerging. It's starting to show up. I'm seeing a little bit of it, but it's not a lot. The others that have all of the diagonal lines, those are things that clearly she has accomplished. So keep in mind and start looking at this. And what I'd like you to do is to think about it again, just like we did with Christopher, and I'd like you to start typing some of the things that you might identify as objectives that you might establish for Maya. Making choices, both unconventional and more conventionally, requesting more, and attention-getting device, or some way to get someone's attention purposefully. Ways to request more of an object, a way to attract attention, greetings, and showing choices. Conventionally refusing and getting attention. I would work on all of the things that are emerging to make her more consistent with them. Requesting new objects, encouraging her to use the label she's already initiating on her own. Choosing between 2, request more, and attracting attention. So all of those are good. Once again, I'm going to tell you that I'm going to go back to looking at her likes and dislikes. I'm going to ask the team things and the family things. What is important to them? I'm thinking about the family who I was working with who said, we just want to be able to go out to McDonald's and have her go out, and this is not Maya, but another child. We just want her to be able to go out and us all have a meal together. It doesn't have to be at a sit-down restaurant or anything that takes a while. It can be, it can be a fast food restaurant, but we just want to be able to do that. So then we started looking at what are some of the things that we can do to help make that happen for the child. What's important to the family? Also, for some of the students all of us work with, there are students who may get to the place as adults that they will live maybe in some kind of a community that supports them in some of the areas that they are not able to do. Some will live on their own, and some will be with their family forever, for as long as they're living. And so the reality is is, you know, we all come and go, and I'm not talking to the parents and the families here. I'm talking to the rest of us. We all come and go in people's lives, okay? But when you're the family member, that child's with you, and it is important to find out what's important. And maybe being able to greet people when they come into the house. Well, that requires, for example, that Maya's interested, that she's curious about that person, that that person might come up close enough to her and want to engage with her. And if there's a way to greet her that everybody else is using, that somebody teach me. This is how we're doing our greeting with Maya. And so when you come to the house, just as you're meeting our other children and you're saying something to me and my husband, I want you to be able to go ahead and greet her. And so it might be a question of teaching some of the neighborhood kids who are interested. So it might be greetings. It might be, as one of you mentioned, gosh, I want to reinforce some of those emerging ones. Maybe I really want to hit those hard. Making choices none of us go through an hour probably where we don't make a choice, probably minutes where we don't make a choice. I'll make a choice to sit in that kind of a chair or that kind of a chair. I'll make a choice between watching television and reading a book. I make a choice between talking to this child in my classroom versus this child in my classroom first. I make a choice, I make a choice, I make a choice. And so choice making so many times is in there. And it's tricky when you've got a child who reaches out, either puts both their hands out for both of them or doesn't do anything. And that's one of those things where that hand under hand piece comes in. I'd like to strengthen her unconventional communication while modeling more conventional communication. So I might be demonstrating to her a way, and again, I'm going to tell you, go back in on these pages and read some of the behaviors that are listed for you to check off if the child does to communicate something to you. Look at those and say, oh, I could model that. I could model shaking my head no. Or I could model nodding my head up and down so that if I'm saying yes, I might be doing something like that, and I might even have my hands under the child's hands and so they can feel my head going up and down for yes, nodding. So look at those descriptions of different things and say, that's a real typical conventional thing I can give that child. Yes, maybe he could eventually vocalize yes and no, and there's nothing wrong with teaching it. But give him or her another way to be understood. Because yes and no are very abstract. Whoever said that N-O, which sounds like no in our language, means no? It could have been blah, and that might have meant no. So keep thinking about that idea is how do I help them? How do I help them do that? What objectives do I pick? So I'm going to suggest, I'm going to encourage, let's go back to here. And for those of you who aren't making suggestions, because you may not be as familiar with the document, okay, or you're not as comfortable with the technology for whatever reason, I would just like you to put a green check if you think that some kind of social interaction somehow should be definitely one of the objectives. Yeah. Because if you see it that it's just emerging here, her making people aware that she's here and she wants them. She wants to make a connection with them. That's really where she's at, of trying just to get someone's attention. It doesn't mean you can't be working on greetings, because I can be at the level of me being the one who greets and initiates with her, and later her being the one who initiates. Okay, so it might be me modeling it for a while and then she'll take over and do it. So that social piece is very important for her to stay connected with people, because that's where she's going to be learning from people. And then I know several of you said, gosh, for her to get something she wants. So here's one of my thoughts is I would be going back to the family and to the people who know her SLP, anybody, her teacher, whoever knows her well. her paraeducator, whoever, and say, what things, not what actions and sensory seeking, what things do you know that she likes? And if the answer is there aren't very many things, now you all probably noticed the trach, and then also she is G-tube fed. Is that right, Kelly or Fran? I'm trying to remember. Yes. Okay. Thanks. And she's G-tube fed. So food is pretty much out. I mean, even though there may be some things she's interested in taking a taste of, but what things? So I might have to start presenting things to her in a way, but we have it be actions at the same time. So it might be that we pick up the horse, the toy horse or something, and we go gallop, 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 and our whole body starts moving back and forth so that she's getting what she wants within the connection of some kind of an object, okay? But it can't just be, I want her to want to pick things up. I need to find out what it is, and do I need to pair that sensory channel that seems to work so well for her? How do I pair it so that eventually she might really be interested in that little horse or whatever else it is, whether it's crayons because she likes to color, or markers, or paint, or clay, or whatever it is. But we might need to do more movement with those objects to make it more enjoyable and more motivating. If it's shiny, if it has lights that go on and off, there's another one of those. So what things, there are things I can pick up and have them be shiny, have lights go on and off, and look for those kinds of things for her, since those are things or objects that she would be interested in. It's hard to pull her away from a TV or a computer screen. So the question becomes, gosh, you know, how do I have something else that's going to be more interesting to her too? So those are the things that I'm looking at, and that's going to lead into next week's as far as, so what kind of activities do we do? But so we've got an objective that has to do with socializing, getting someone's attention purposefully, and let's say greetings. And then also getting her, I'm going to say that we're going to reinforce the concepts, okay, or the objectives that are emerging in the area of refusing and getting what she wants. And it's like a new object. How do I let mom or my teacher know that I want to play with that thing, or I want to do that sensory seeking activity? If I don't sign it yet, and I don't have a sign for it, okay, how do I let them know when I want to do something, instead of it always being, this is in your schedule and we're going to do it? There's nothing wrong with the schedule. It's great for anticipation, especially for all these nonverbal kids. However, how do I let you know what I want to do? So that's that piece we're going to look for. So we're talking about greetings, we're talking about getting attention, we're talking about getting more of something, and also getting something new. How do I let you know what I want? So that'll get into how are we going to do that, but just so that we can think about that. So in Maya's way of expressive, I didn't put anything up there because we were going to talk through this today. So what are the ways, and I'm going to just take you back a ways and remind you, maybe. Oh boy, this is taking forever, sorry. Whoops. So, what are some of the ways, based on the communication matrix, that you definitely see, and the little video you saw of Maya, that would be ways that she would, what would we put in this pie-shaped circle? So we've got smile, so we're talking facial expressions, and we're talking vocalizations possibly. Other ways she communicates based on, and now I'm going to go, I'm sorry, but now I'm going to go back to her communication matrix, because that's going to tell us some things too. Okay, moving towards the paraeducator, okay, body language. Something you didn't see, but you will next week in a video on her is she's excited. Her arms flap, and she even does a little kicking thing with her legs. So it's some body movement stuff. Touch cues is in the hand under hand. So I might be signing something to her, or she might touch something and take my hand to it. But remember, I also have to keep reminding myself I'm thinking expressively about how she communicates to me. And I saw her once when I was watching her, takes my hand to put it on an object. So there's that hand movement. There's some of the stuff we talked about earlier about the unconventional to conventional communication part, taking her somewhere. Okay. So those are that's what ends up going into these. Now there's a different percentage for every child of how much they use one or the other, depending upon the activity they're in. And so just as a reminder to you, this is not, it's just a way for me to visually wrap my head around, here are all the ways I want to be paying attention to her. I want to pay attention and know that when she's moving those arms up and down, okay, that means something. That has a meaning to it that I can help shape. I'm not reading her, and remember, we're not trying to learn how to read her mind. We're trying to figure out how she communicates so that we can actually help her do it in a more conventional way that all of us would understand. And just a reminder and thanks, we're close to the end, so please remember to take the SurveyMonkey evaluation again for us. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip student C because I want to give student C some time because this is a 20-year-old. So we've had almost a middle school-aged boy. We've had a 6-year-old beginning elementary girl. And this is a student who is 20 years old, and it's a young woman in a transitional program. So I want to be able to start with her next time. I want to not rush through on that, and we will start with her, but we're also going to go from the objectives to actually moving on to, hang on, let me just get through this. Okay, Michaela, you want to put up those objectives for A and B? Good. So student A, Christopher, we talked about greetings. Refusing and obtaining at a more conventional level and making choices. Getting someone's attention for Maya and greetings. Getting more or something new. Improving emerging items, and that was in that social area where there were so many of them. But there were also under the obtaining and refusing. So I want you to be thinking about this for next week because we're going to take those objectives and say, how do we turn those into activities that are motivating, purposeful, functional, and meaningful to the child, and move forward. And then it becomes an issue of depending upon the progress the child's making, it might be 6 months later that you reevaluate using the communication matrix. It might be a year later, and we'll talk about that next week. I want to show you a couple examples of over time what's happened for a couple students. And I was going to do that today, but the design I did was so confusing. So Michaela and I are going to work on that for next week. So with that, I'm going to just ask that all of you go ahead and fill out the evaluation. The PowerPoint will be sent out to you tomorrow, and also this quick little thing that Michaela just did on student A and student B, because I'd like you to be thinking about what are some activities within the context of a classroom that you might be thinking that would fulfill these in a way that is useful and meaningful and draws that child into being with others and participating with others. And with that, I'm going to just say thanks again to Maya's family as well as Maya's staff who are working with her for letting me use her as an example. And then also I I want to thank another group for the Student C, and I'll do that for next week. And we'll be then looking at what are purposeful and meaningful activities that we can use. And with that, I'm going to tell you guys have a good evening. And I think that's it. So long. I hope the snow's slowing down outside my house. I don't know about all of you. And with that, take care and have a great evening. Bye. Oh, yeah. See you next week.